when a president broke the rules to save the nation. Every presidency is bound by rules, laws, traditions, norms designed to limit power and protect democracy. They exist to slow decision-making, distribute authority, and prevent any single individual from acting unchecked. In ordinary times, these constraints are the system's greatest strength. They ensure stability by forcing deliberation, transparency, and accountability. But history reveals moments when those same rules become obstacles, when following them risks collapse, and breaking them becomes the only path forward. This story begins at one of those moments. The nation was not at war. The government had not fallen. There were no tanks in the streets, no visible panic, no public declaration of emergency. From the outside, stability appeared intact. Institutions still functioned. Markets still opened. Daily life continued as usual. But inside the presidency, alarms were sounding. Systems were failing faster than public timelines allowed. Processes that assumed normal conditions were buckling under pressures they were never designed to handle. Legal pathways moved too slowly. Institutional safeguards were built for stability, not speed. And these were not normal times. To understand why this president crossed a line, we need to understand the pressure of responsibility at that moment. The choice was not between right and wrong in the abstract. It was between action that violated precedent and inaction that risked irreversible damage. The president was staring at outcomes that could not be undone once set in motion. Delay itself had become a form of decision. Advisors warned of consequences. Legal experts cautioned restraint, emphasizing the long-term danger of expanding executive authority. Political allies urged caution, fearful of backlash and historical judgment. Every voice acknowledged the gravity of the situation, but disagreement centered on one question: how much risk could the system survive? The president saw something others didn't: a narrowing window where conventional process would arrive too late to matter. The rules existed to protect the nation, but now they were preventing it from being protected. So a decision was made, quietly, deliberately, without ceremony or public justification. Authority was stretched. Interpretations were widened. Boundaries were crossed that had never been crossed before. And for a brief moment, the presidency operated beyond its usual limits, not in open defiance, but through emergency logic that lived in gray areas few had ever tested. To some, this would later look like overreach. To others, courage. At the time, it felt like necessity. Because once systems begin to fail, leadership does not get the luxury of perfect options. It only gets moments, and this was one of them. The action itself was not dramatic on the surface. There were no visible displays of force, no suspension of elections, no announcement that rules had been broken. In fact, most people never realized anything unusual had happened at all. Daily life continued uninterrupted. Headlines moved on. The absence of spectacle was not accidental. That invisibility was intentional. The president understood that visibility would change everything. Public debate would slow response. Legal challenges would freeze momentum. Political opposition would reframe urgency as abuse. Transparency in this moment would function as paralysis. So the move was executed quietly through technical authority, emergency interpretation, and powers that existed, but had never been pushed this far. Inside the administration, tension spiked immediately. Staff questioned the precedent being set. Lawyers searched for justification after the fact, constructing legal rationales to stabilize what had already been done. Allies worried not about this president, but about the next one. What would this expanded authority look like in less careful hands? What had just been normalized? But the immediate result was undeniable. The collapse was stopped. What had been spiraling stabilized. Systems resumed function. Confidence returned where panic had been forming. Markets calmed. Institutions held. The nation moved forward without ever knowing how close it had come to a very different outcome. The absence of disaster became proof that the decision had been correct, or at least effective. And that success created a dangerous question. If breaking the rules worked once, would it work again? The president did not celebrate the decision. There were no victory speeches, no memoir-ready declarations of heroism, because this was not a triumph. It was a trade. Stability in exchange for precedent. Safety in exchange for restraint. The president understood that something intangible had been spent to buy that calm. History often focuses on what leaders do. It rarely asks what they normalize. And with this decision, something subtle but lasting changed. The boundaries of power shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to be noticed by those who mattered most. Not the public. Future leaders. In the aftermath, the nation returned to routine. News cycles moved on. Crises faded from headlines. To most people, it felt like the system had proven its strength, that whatever danger existed had been handled responsibly, that institutions had held. But inside the corridors of power, the conversation had changed. What once felt unthinkable was now documented, studied, filed away as an option. The decision became a reference point, not publicly debated, but quietly remembered. A reminder that rules could bend under sufficient pressure and that bending them could work. This is how extraordinary power becomes ordinary. No law was rewritten, no amendment passed, no formal authority expanded on paper. But the threshold shifted. What had once required desperation now required justification. What required justification now required explanation. And eventually, explanation becomes habit. The exception becomes precedent without ever being declared one. Some within the administration argued for transparency, that sunlight could limit misuse, that public reckoning would prevent future abuse. Others warned that exposure would undermine trust, invite backlash, and weaken the presidency long-term. Once again, restraint won, not because it was safer, but because it was easier. The precedent remained intact, and that created an uncomfortable reality. Future leaders would inherit not just authority, but expanded possibility. The same tools, the same interpretations, the same logic of necessity. Whether they would use them with the same caution was an unanswered question, and one history would eventually test. History rarely punishes the first rule breaker when the outcome is success. It watches what happens next. Because the real danger is not the moment rules are broken. It is the moment they stop feeling exceptional. In the years that followed, the decision remained officially invisible. It was not taught, not condemned, not praised, but it lived on quietly in the assumptions of power, shaping how future crises were evaluated. When new emergencies emerged, advisors remembered this moment, not aloud, not in memos, but in instinct, the knowledge that rules could be stretched, that precedent could be reinterpreted, that authority, once expanded, never fully returns to its original shape. This is the hidden cost of saving the nation by breaking the rules. The crisis ended. The country survived. But the boundary moved. And while that shift may have prevented disaster once, it also created temptation, a belief that necessity justifies exception and exception justifies repetition. What begins as emergency logic can quietly become governing philosophy. History does not deliver verdicts in moments like this. It waits. It watches how often emergency becomes explanation, how quickly restraint fades, how easily power remembers what it is capable of. Because leadership is not judged only by the crises it survives. It is judged by the standards it leaves behind. Sometimes the smallest shift in precedent becomes the beginning of a new future.